Hello and welcome to Chattin' with Janine. I'm your host, State Representative Janine Nodder. The topic for this week's show is financial fraud, and my guest is Jeffrey Graham of Laconia. So welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm a Graham too. I think I told you that.
Talked a little bit about this. The colors. You're wearing the colors.
I am wearing the colors and the pin.
That's great.
So there's a name for this pin. Other Scottish people know what it is.
I've long since forgotten. I have one myself.
Do you?
Yeah.
I didn't know I was Scottish until I was an adult. And this was the first year that I participated in Tartan Day at the State House.
Okay.
Because I spent too many years in Catholic school wearing plaid.
Sure.
Yes. But that's a long time ago, so I'm wearing this for you. So welcome, fellow Klansmen.
Thank you, yes.
And today we're talking about financial fraud.
Correct. I spent a lot of time in my career in that area. I feel pretty comfortable talking about it, and I certainly had an opportunity to, unfortunately, be part of a lot of those investigations and litigation projects where fraud was a topic, and the reason why I was brought in was that.
So what is your job?
Well, I started out as a tax person, morphed into an auditor. From that, I got asked to do some fact witness things in court, and then became an expert witness as I got comfortable in that position. So over probably a 35-year period of time, I was in a couple of hundred cases, not all of which went to court, and not all of which were forensic or fraud related. But certainly near the end of my career, most of the work that I did in court was fraud or forensic.
Can you, forensic, what do you mean?
So forensic is kind of like being a detective for financial items as opposed to blood or accident scene. So forensic is really just someone who is looking at the evidence on a financial basis and using that to help people litigating or maybe regulatory agencies or courts determine if there was any malfeasance or misappropriation of funds or elder abuse or anything that might have been in a topic area that I spent my career in.
Yeah, elder abuse, I have done a show on that before. It's a very, very sad topic, and it's scary. It's very scary. There's even movies about it.
Correct. It's a real high energy, high emotion kind of topic area. I actually had some family members that were a part of some issues like that, and then from that I got asked by some law firms to actually help put together the pieces of the puzzle for elder abuse.
Can you share some cases with us that you worked on?
Well, the one that comes to mind was actually a Concord, New Hampshire case, an older person who had someone that was actually handling her finances. That was another professional. And a lot of the records were hard to find. She wasn't really providing them to the family and to the courts. And there were some monies taken, and part of my position was working with the family as their expert witness and the law firm as their expert witness to determine the transactions, the propriety of those transactions, if there was something that I felt was not correct or not appropriately stated by this guardian. That was my position, to provide that information to the court and to the family and the law firm.
Was the guardian a family member or a
No,
court appointed?
Another professional that was court appointed.
See, that's what I worry about, a court appointed.
Yeah.
Because we all have elderly people in our lives, and we have to take care of them.
Correct.
Because if we don't, then a stranger is appointed a guardian, and who knows? Who knows what they're going to do?
My dad had an issue when he lived in Maine, and that's how I got started in that whole topic area, and felt pretty strongly that that was a spot that I could maybe provide some assistance and professionalism to.
And did it have a positive outcome?
It didn't really, unfortunately, but we certainly addressed it throughout a probably 2-year process.
So if somebody has an elderly relative, what is your advice to them to avoid getting a court-appointed guardian?
I would say more than one person is probably a fairly safe answer. They should have one or two or three, not one, but 2 or 3 people signing off on transactions. And they might not necessarily have to be the 2 or 3 signatures on every check, but it'd be a good idea for the information that was coming to them for income or asset sales or monies going out for various types of expenses, to actually have somebody else check, sign off, question, just to be sure that that person knows that there's that sort of over-the-shoulder look at them, because that deterrence is probably the most effective long-term kind of keeping the person on the straight and narrow scenario.
Thank you. Another term that came up when we were talking before the show was financial manipulation.
Yes. So it's not uncommon for somebody who's trying to hide facts to, say, make a transfer to themselves or someplace on their behalf and to code it in the records as something different. I had a case where their partners, shareholders in a company, one handled all of the finance, one didn't. There were some items that were spent on behalf of one of the two shareholders and not on behalf of the other. And the description in the books that the person kept for the company was insurance or a travel-related, maybe a car expenses or some other kind of manipulation of the real use of the funds, so that the person, the shareholder, the other shareholder, wouldn't really recognize that as something that had gone to his partner or his shareholder partner inappropriately. So misappropriation that way.
So, and the term cooked books?
It's pretty common. Any number of ways to describe what I do is, checking if there's cooked books, and basically that means is there something inappropriate, something incorrect, something that was manipulating the real facts in order to benefit one party to the detriment of another party.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever come across people who had falsehoods in their books, but not on purpose? They're just...
Oh, sure. Yeah. Human error is human error. And you can, usually when somebody makes an error, they're really embarrassed about it. They go and they find the transaction, they try and explain. Maybe there's another party that comes in to justify or to maybe throw a different angle on it. But I mean, everybody's human, so there's always something in a set of records that's not going to go perfect. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole different story than somebody that's done it, manipulating it to hide it, continuing to try and hide it and not provide the backup to support their position or their action or their actual entry.
So it's a crime. Financial fraud is obviously a crime.
Correct.
But what is the punishment for? Is it like a misdemeanor, a felony? Or?
It depends on the dollar amount. Sometimes it depends on who the oppressed party is. So elder abuse is taken very differently than your shareholder partner in terms of taking advantage of another party. The charging order, as it's called in a felony case.
Charging order?
Yeah,
okay.
Charging order is what the prosecution provides to the courts that says, here are all the things that we believe were incorrect. Here's the dollar amount associated with them. And here's what we think the statute allows us to offer up as a penalty, either cash penalty or jail time or something along those lines. So there's sort of a list of items in a charging order, and the more items in the charging order means that potentially the fine could be larger, or the time behind prison bars, jail bars, wow, could be longer.
How many people do you know of go to jail for financial fraud?
I was in a Rockingham, New Hampshire case where the gentleman pleaded guilty and they took him away in handcuffs.
Wow.
That was pretty interesting. I'd never been in a case like that before where they did that. It's pretty sobering for the family to have their loved one walk out with handcuffs and knew that that person was going to be in prison for a while.
Awful. What is Ponzi scheme? Is that part of financial fraud?
Yeah, it is,
and
absolutely.
Can you define, because it's been a while since we've talked about that.
Ponzi scheme is traditionally where a person lured an investor to give money for a purpose, call it purpose A, all the while knowing that they really weren't going to use that to have for purpose A, like buy a piece of commercial real estate with that money. Or maybe put it into a certain type of investment that they were proposing as an investment that might grow in value. And then using it for something very different and manipulating the actual statement to show the person that their investment was still worthwhile, that it was actually made into that particular stated purpose investment, but using it for something else. Mr. Bankman-Fried is the most recent one out in, I think, California, where he brought in a whole bunch of money, billions of dollars, used them for the purpose not stated to everybody, manipulated the actual investment return statement to them. And the only way that he could do that was to continually have sources of money coming in after the first person, and after the second person, and after the 100th person. And what he did is he used new money to pay the older original investors because they're promised a rate of return, they're promised their money back. Well, the only way you can do that is to have person C putting money in to pay person A. or person F putting money in to pay person B. And so that's that Ponzi scheme. That's it's actually a case of U.S. government versus Ponzi.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask where the word Ponzi comes from.
Yeah, and so that was sort of the original case name, and everybody just used that as the example of what happened in that particular case. And they used a lot of the case law and all the information provided in the Ponzi case to just use that in their case to help their case along if they were a prosecutor.
So what if there was an ad one time for a solar-powered clothes dryer, and people sent money in to get the solar-powered clothes dryer, and what they received in the mail was a clothesline and clothespins.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Well, caveat emptor, buyer beware, ask enough questions, depending upon who that was. If it was an 86-year-old person with maybe not all their faculties, that would be viewed very differently than a person with a financial background who was 40 years old. I'm not, but if I was 40 years old, I should know better. I would be the person that probably wouldn't be treated the same in a court as my grandparents would have been. So, and it's not, if it's wrong, it's wrong, but it depends on the level of severity and simplicity of the person that they were selling it to.
I see you have a lot of notes that you brought too.
Yes.
So, and I have some as well from our initial conversation. So you were telling me about an owner of a restaurant and wedding venue with concerns about staff not reporting all sales of alcohol or food.
Right. So I was at I was asked to be kind of like a secret shopper, if you will. And I was asked to go to this particular venue, fixed location, many years of history, relatively well-heeled owners, but they knew that there was something going on. And they just, if they were there, the person wouldn't do it while they were there because they were watching them and they knew who the employer's staff was, basically. So they sent me in unannounced to just be kind of a viewer of the activities. And it turns out it was a wedding venue, and there were two cash-out locations with cash registers that were tied into the computer system. And the person that was in charge of that outdoor activity, the manager, if you will, was at a third location, and that was not tied into anything. So they would go, if you just imagine being at a wedding reception, mingle around the crowd, they would go to bar number 1 and bar number 2 and bar number 3. Well, the proceeds from bar 1 and bar 2 were collected and properly recorded in the books, and everybody was above board. It got checked by people afterwards. But the third location went into the pocket of the person who was actually the perpetrator of a crime. And so they thought that it was odd that the volume of alcohol and the volume of soft drinks and the volume of other kinds of products were percentage-wise much greater at those events than they were typically. If you pour a shot, it's a certain amount of fluid ounces that are used. And if you count up the number of sales of shots and you compared it against what actually the inventory was dropping by, they said, well, this just doesn't make any sense. They're either way over pouring, or, which is a problem in itself internally, or there's somebody not actually reporting all of the revenues. So I was asked to go and just observe what was going on, document what I saw, who was there, what the approximate number of people were that visited location number 3, and to give them a sense of whether their intuition was correct or not correct, and then have somebody that could actually be an expert witness, because you have to be sort of independent in many respects to be an expert. You could be a fact witness and be the controller of that company or the owner of that company, but a fact witness can't do the same thing as an expert witness does.
A fact witness.
So fact witness would be, yes, that person worked for me, yes, that person was the manager, yes, that person was responsible for setting up the entire venue, having control over it, and it was on their watch that this happened, and oh, by the way, in this particular one, that was the person who really was perpetrating the felony or the crime. Mm-hmm. That person could say yes, yes, yes to all of those sorts of things, and then I come in and do the valuation of what the loss was, give my expert opinion on whether that should have actually been included in the revenues for the day for that wedding venue. So stuff that courts don't necessarily allow employees of the company to provide. They ask for an outside party to actually give verification. And that's where the expert witness part of this comes in.
On my notes, I have something about a condo association, and that caught my eye because as a state representative, every year I hear from people who live in condominiums
Yes.
with their grievances, and we have a very difficult time trying to help them.
Yeah. So this one wasn't really a fraud. It was just a person who was asked to do a very specific insurance summary of fire damages. And that person just wasn't really that experienced and didn't have a system in place and really didn't know where to start and got in over her head. So the insurance company said, here's these checks. And then at some point they said, well, doesn't make any sense. These expenses are way greater per square foot than we expected them to be. Provide us with all the information that you have that shows that it was condo number 1, which we covered, condo number 2, which we didn't cover, condo number 3, 4, 5 we did. Because in condominiums, you can have several different insurance companies. And so one company shouldn't pay for everything. One company should just pay for their insured, and others should pay for the insureds. So they asked me to come in, our firm to come in and actually look at those transactions and recreate all of the expenses by condominium area or by common area, like the hallway or the outside of the building or an entryway or a community room or something. And that was an error. We had talked about, things could be potentially just plain error. In that case, it was just a person that had never done it before, didn't have a system in place, didn't ask enough questions, and we just had to go in and provide, basically putting the puzzle back together. A 2,000 piece or a 5,000 piece or a 20,000 piece puzzle was what they really were going to do before the insurance company cut another check. So the association and its members knew they would not actually have any more money coming to them until we could actually go in and do our work and prove that they still were owed money for their particular condominium unit and or the association was owed money for its common area.
What do you have on your paper?
So we've talked about a couple things. I would say vendor payments would be another issue. Vendor payments would be typically the vendor is asked to provide a quote or some sort of an estimate of what it might be. It goes through the chain of procedure through a company, and they sign off on it and say, yes, we need that. Yes, that dollar amount's correct. Yes, we've gone out for 3 bids, and go ahead and contract with that vendor and go ahead and make payments. In many cases, the person who's actually writing the checks or in a position of management control over a lot of people who are writing the checks puts enough pressure on them to actually just send a check to a certain location without really a lot of documentation. And my brother actually was in a company where his boss built a house on the Cape with monies and materials from the company that they both worked for. And it wasn't until something odd happened that somebody said, well, gosh, this doesn't make any sense for us at our firm. Why are we buying that for and paying money for that? And so they went back and they actually checked, and this gentleman had done everything that he could to pay a particular vendor or series of vendors to work on his home, his second home on the Cape, and actually make it look like it was part of his budget for a relatively large company that spent a lot of money for the maintenance. They were basically facility managers for this particular large company around the country.
So in the over 20 minutes that we've been talking, I'm learning that it sounds like it's pretty easy to commit financial fraud.
It is.
And how easy is it to catch people?
I think if you really are interested in reviewing your own records, certainly if you are, say, the owner of a company and you have somebody who you trust to handle all of those records, it's trust but verify is probably a scenario that gets used a lot. I know the statistics. I used to be an adjunct professor at Southern New Hampshire in this whole forensic area. And it's more likely than not a longtime employee who's been in that financial position for years, decades maybe, would be the person who has gained that level of trust so that nobody checks his or her work. Nobody questions his or her explanation of what a transaction is for. And if you look at the cases that have gone through courts, it's very common that it's the trusted advisor that was really the person that they shouldn't have been trusting as much as they did, and that had a lot of responsibility, a lot of authority, a lot of control over others, and didn't necessarily need to have somebody above them sign off on something or approve something. They could actually do it themselves. And that person just got to the point where they saw all that money coming in and thought, well, I should probably get a portion of that. I'm working too hard. They're not paying me enough. This is something that I need for medical expenses for my family, college education, a house, a major repair or maintenance item that they didn't expect, that they didn't have the money for. And they said, well, I'll just take it now and I'll take a little bit more later. And we find that the length of time between the first and second offense was usually long. And then between second and third, it shortened up a little bit, and the dollar amount got higher.
Yeah.
And they just keep doing more transactions with larger dollar amounts, and that spiral goes up to a point where it says, okay, now it's really evident that we just don't have this situation with that particular group or that person. We know we've made more money than that. We know we've collected more money than that. We wouldn't expect that we would be in this financial crisis that we are. Let's go find out why. And that's where a lot of the work comes from, that our firm or a lot of other forensic accountants or fraud investigators get their work from, is to actually hear from people that are in many different walks of life. And I've got a thing here that says the users are shareholder dispute folks, court appointments, law firms that are providing legal services, financial crime assessments being done by regulatory, law enforcement, and then elder abuse cases that might be going through the state. And maybe insurance companies that were looking at claims payments and knowing that there was just something not quite right with those. So it's probably more than that in my career, but that's the easy ones. That's the low-hanging fruit was those that I just mentioned.
How bad is the problem in New Hampshire, or do you know?
It's significant. I think if you go back through the news and just were to punch in fraud, you'd probably see quite a few cases from New Hampshire.
Wow. Probably people we know, too.
Yeah.
Small state.
Yeah.
We all know
Agreed.
each other eventually. Right. Yeah. Wow. So we have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Do you have any other interesting cases you could tell us about?
Well, I mean, the funniest one that I had, the biggest irony case that I had is I was working on a case. I got asked by a court to come in and look at their one particular location that had bail money missing. So if somebody comes in, they've been charged with a crime, they need to get bail money placed, and then they would basically be released. And then after a while, they would go to court, and that bail money would be part of restitution. And they'd say, well, yes, okay, we had paid $5,000 up front, and then the money couldn't be traced back to the actual transaction. They were wondering why. And that was a case where, almost like the Ponzi scheme, where C paid for A and F paid for B, the monies brought in from the first person was actually taken and used by the person that was an employee of the court. And then, like the 10th person that came along, that deposit was made and put in the name of the first person. Said, here's a deposit for Jeff Graham, $5,000. But it wasn't really Jeff Graham's money that time. It was Janine Nodder's money. And so that's that sort of circular thing. And after a while, there's so much money missing and there's not enough money coming in that people start to say, well, wait a minute, you've got an accounting for bail monies that have been collected of hypothetically $200,000, but there's only $60,000 in the bank. What happened to the other $140,000? So we were asked to come in to the bail records room, go through all of the transactions, all of the charging orders from the court, from the judge, match that up with payments in and payments out, and then see what happened. And we actually, as a group of 3, nailed the last 12, in my recollection, of the cases where they brought money in. And those 12 cases were actually deposited to cover previous people's money who was actually taken and used by that person. So we could actually tell the court exactly how that happened. And then they said, well, we got a real problem. We didn't identify this problem. How about if you come to the local spot that they wanted us to do the seminar in and train all of the 62 court location managers about this. So we went and did the training session, which was about a 3-day long session. And one person in the front row was asking way too many questions. Place was kind of quiet. They weren't really happy with the topic, but this one particular person just kept hammering all of us all day long. And I said to the folks at the end of the day, I said, there's something going on with this kind of reaction. It's kind of odd. Maybe you just want to take a look and see what's happening in that person's location. And they said, oh no, my gosh, she's been here forever. There's no way she'd ever do that. About 12 months later, they called me up and they said, you absolutely nailed it.
Yeah,
this
wow.
person had a huge amount of stuff going on right then. Your intuition was great. Can you go check that out? So even though they went through that process, the whole trusted advisor thing comes back into play about no, it couldn't possibly happen under those circumstances, but it does.
You just never know.
And the fact that you're stealing bail money there's a little irony to that.
Yeah, because you're going to end up needing it.
Well, yeah.
Wow. Do you think going paperless has made it easier to commit financial fraud? 'Cause,
Yes.
you know, you don't have a paper trail.
Correct. And there's a whole generation of people who are not comfortable looking at reports. And they might be people that were very comfortable looking at their own signature on a check, or their handwriting to pay a vendor a dollar amount, or the deposit ticket actually looked like the right dollar amount that was deposited. Maybe it was cash. And that's, I think, a very big piece, is there's not the same level of familiarity, confidence, and then there are certain computer programs for accounting, and I won't name them, but they can be manipulated after an original transaction has been entered. And there's a place that goes called an audit trail box. So if I write a check to Jeff Graham for $10,000, I could then go back in and make a change that said it went to ABC Insurance Company for $10,000. Well, what happens is the report that's generated actually shows as ABC, but the audit trail location says that the check was originally Jeff Graham and it became ABC. So many people who are doing this don't understand the program, and they've basically just told the entire world what they're doing inappropriately. And until that information kind of got out in the general public and people who were using the programs understood it, they didn't realize that they were just cooking their goose. They had been found cooking the books. They could show the entire scenario. So now all the investigators have to do is to say, give me your bank statements, your personal bank statements. Jeff Graham deposited 10 grand. Let's go see when it actually went in.
And most people don't have paper copies of bank statements anymore.
True.
Everything is online.
But the great thing about courts and certain regulatory places, they have subpoena power to get all that stuff, and banks give them up pretty freely.
Well, we're about out of time, but thank you for the whole rundown on financial fraud, and gosh, I hope it never happens to us, and just obey the law, okay?
Yes. Southern New Hampshire University has a great program for this. It's a certificate program with some really talented people, and I'm very happy that they're doing that, because it certainly shines the light on problems, people that can actually fix it, people that are concerned about it, and New Hampshire has a lot of experienced professionals in that area, and it's really helpful.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you for watching.